Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right. Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics and Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We're going to have a great show for you today. We have a hell of an interview, so we got to get started real quick. So here we go. Jonathan Simon calls code red on the 2020 election. COVID Trump sycophancy continues. Jonathan Simon talks about the dangers in our computerized election system devoid of paper audits. When will the GOP throw in the Trump towel? When will they say we've had enough? When will all this happen? Folks, you know what? I want you to listen to this one good doctor. This one good doctor is going to say something and it's going to be like, I know. Here we go. This doctor said a prescient thing. I want you to listen to her and then we'll go ahead and take it on the other side.
Now, going back to masks, it's really simple, Brian. We have data to show that wearing a mask, I never leave the home wearing one of these. In this case, it's an N95 because I work directly with COVID-infected patients. But if to your point, we have data showing that if the vast majority of people in this country just covered their face when they're around other people, and if they maintain this distance, you're absolutely right. It would lead to the thousands of lives being saved. And at this point in the game, at this stage of the pandemic, Brian, let's just be really clear. It's not the virus that's killing people. It's morally impotent leadership, and it's utterly frustrating.
Morally impotent leadership. Later on, I'm going to go ahead after we do the interview and show you one of those morally incompetent leaders. But right now, let's go ahead and get started. We need to get busy with Jonathan Simon. Here we go. Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. I'm here with Jonathan D. Simon. And who's Jonathan D. Simon? He is the author of Code Red, Computerized Elections and the War on American Democracy. And we're going to talk about the 2020 edition. Jonathan Simon, how are you doing today?
All right, man. I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Well, look, I'm happy to have you. Look, you wrote this book, I think, after I didn't get a chance to read the book in detail, but after going through the chapters and going through, you do a question answer kind of a deal. I said to myself, this guy's pretty damn concerned. Talk to me. Why are you concerned? And tell me about your book, because I think that is where we really, really want to kind of tune in based on what your thoughts are.
Yeah, this book is now in its 5th edition. So we started in 2012. I've been working the election forensics beat, election integrity, election forensics, trying to draw a bead on whether elections have been legitimate or manipulated in some way in this country since 2002. And so when I first wrote Code Red in 2012, that was distilling about 10 years of research and fact gathering, data analysis, and just observation and investigation. And since 2012, the book keeps putting on weight. It just keeps putting on ounces with every new edition because it hasn't stopped. And in fact, it's really intensified. So the 2020 edition, which is the one that is currently for sale, has gotten rather fat. And it has information in it about, obviously, the 2016 election, also, though, 2018, and also looking at what we're heading into in 2020. And I have to say that, you have to put a book out at some time. At some point you got to hit send and publish the thing. But events, in many ways, have run by, even where Code Red was 2 months ago when I pulled the trigger. Things are moving very, very fast, and in a direction that really, I don't think anybody can say with any degree of certainty or even confidence where we're going to be 6 months from now.
Okay, give me the premise of your book, because what you gave was an overview. I'd like to get the guts of, computerized elections and the war on American democracy. What is that war?
Yeah. Well, we all assume that, democracy, we know our democracy is imperfect. We know it's had obviously voter suppression. It's had all sorts of qualifications for voting. It's had racial, powerful racial overtones. So it's not a perfect democracy, but we assume that fundamentally at the core level of the democracy, votes are cast, and if you're lucky enough to be able to cast a vote, it will be counted. We've just assumed that votes were counted. And for most of our history, there was reason to make that assumption, because votes were pretty much counted in public. They were counted by hand, and they were counted in a way that people could observe. Your enemies could observe, and the losers of elections could observe, so they would have basic trust in the results. We've progressively computerized our elections, and this is a trend that began probably in the 50s or 60s, a long time ago, but it really picked up steam towards the end of the last century, and then specifically in 2002 with the passage of the Help America Vote Act, which was a response to the hanging chads debacle in Florida in the 2000 election. And once HAVA was passed, we basically fully computerized our elections so that votes were being many times cast without any paper being involved. They were being counted in what I like to call the partisan proprietary pitch dark of cyberspace, because it's run by private outfits with very strong partisan affiliations, and completely hidden, because it's taking place somewhere where a bunch of ones and zeros and bits and bytes were being, processed. And so, if you take one step back and you think about how insane it would be to count any election secretly, unobservably, so we use the magician taking the ballots behind the curtain. Let's say you're having a union election in a union hall for a union rep. So there are 200 people in the room, and you cast your ballots, you hand it to this guy who's standing on the stage. He goes behind the curtain, you hear some shuffling sounds, you hear the shredder, and he comes out and says, Dick won. And the results were, 115 to 85. Well, if you're Jane and you lost that election and you had no opportunity to see those votes being counted and you have no access to the votes afterwards, you're going to have a hard time trusting that result. So it's inherently crazy to count votes unobservably. And yet that's what we do in our actual elections, really from dog catcher all the way up to president. And that also includes the entire infrastructure of American politics. So we're looking at the Senate, the House, the state legislatures, attorneys general, a lot of judges that are elected. Really the whole infrastructure. We tend to be focused. The media and the public attention tends to be focused on the presidency. But that in a way can almost be misdirection, because underneath that is a huge infrastructure that is vulnerable to manipulation and miscounting.
I think that's an alert that needs to be taken seriously, because as you've explained, I think given that we're using electronic voting for just about every level of government, at the point where the populace wants something that the plutocracy does not. At that point, because they control the levers that build those systems, they're the ones who will determine who ultimately could win if they don't want it to be a truly democratic process. So I think the alarm that you're bringing up here is very important, but I think you also have statistical data that shows as we moved from, again, easily verifiable results to computerized results, that the exit polls have steadily gotten worse relative to what the computer results were. Is that correct?
Yes, with a little bit of an asterisk. I mean, first of all, I'd say steadily might not be quite the word. They actually sort of suddenly got worse when
Suddenly,
we
okay.
computerized. So it was a pretty sharp.
Let me. I want to back up again. I mean, not to belittle the point, but when I say steadily, I mean I want to make sure that this is not the case. As more computerization came into the fold, is it true that the exit polls deviated from the computer results?
Yes, but again with an asterisk. I mean, I'm going to get a little complicated here, and hold on.
No, we need to know that. Yeah, we need to know that.
What we don't have, so what people like me did, I mean, this is for me starting in 2004. So I'll tell you just quickly the story of 2004. It was an election that, based on all the circumstances at that time, there was a lot of concern that election might not be on the up and up. As a matter of fact, John Kerry, who was running against Bush, earmarked, he set aside $15 million, a separate fund, to challenge red flagged election, if there were results that looked bad, like as they had been in Florida in 2000. So he had this big fund. So it wasn't some far fringe set of suspicions. I mean, there was a pretty mainstream. So going into the 2004 election, and based on what had happened in 2000, and then also in 2002, where they scrubbed the exit polls, they were so far off that they were not released publicly. I thought, well, we need a burglar alarm system. We got to run basically independent exit polls. And I thought we could easily raise $3, $4, $5 million to do that. I mean, obviously the country at that time was polarized. I mean, not quite like it is today, but it was quite polarized. And there was a lot of concern. So I thought, well, you just go out and say, well, we need these so we can have a check mechanism on the election. And of course, we fell about, $2,995,000 short of $3 million. There just was no interest. I mean, there was denial. It was never happened here on the part of the media and part of the public, that, things would take care of themselves. So on election night, I found myself, looking at I happened to be on the CNN website, and because of a computer glitch, the unadjusted exit polls, the first posted exit polls, before they adjust them to congruence with the vote counts, which is something they do for a variety of reasons, but the justifiable reason is that the vote counts must be accurate. So if we make the exit polls match the vote counts, then the things that the exit polls are telling us about this voter group or that voter group are going to be more accurate. So that's the ostensible reason for adjusting. But if you sit and you just wait, and you, let's say, pull the exit polls the following day, they're going to match the vote counts. So what we wanted to do is, pull the first set of posted exit polls. And I didn't have a PDF maker in those days. I'm not a great tech guy, and I had a printer, and I started printing out these unadjusted exit polls, state by state, and for the national exit poll, they run a separate poll for the whole nation. And then at that time, they were exit polling every state. Now they only exit poll about half the states.
Right.
But I basically printed out. It was about 600 pages that I printed out, and it took me quite a while because, it has to come up, and it's loading, and it's this and that. It took me hours. But I was lucky because today the unadjusted exit polls might stay up for 2 minutes. That, because of this glitch, they stayed up until about 12:19 a.m. So I started around 8 p.m. and for 4 hours I was printing these out. And I tell you, I assumed naively as it may be, I assumed that there were probably 100,000 other people around the world doing exactly what I was doing, because there was all this concern and all this interest around the world. And so I figured, well, everybody's going to have this. And I did a back of the envelope calculation by about 2 a.m. I had this pattern. And this is where exit polls get interesting and more reliable than they're given credit for, because certain patterns of exit poll disparity are what clue us into the fact that there's likely been manipulation, not just the disparity, but where these disparities are. And I looked at it, and it wasn't literally the back of an envelope, but it was basically, pencil and paper, and I put it onto a spreadsheet, and I was like, whoa, this really jumps out, because we were seeing a certain pattern and a certain magnitude along with that pattern that said something is really wrong here. And there I was about 4 a.m, and I just assumed that, I'll turn on the news and everybody will have it. And of course, nobody had it. Literally nobody else had this data in the whole world, with all the God knows how many 100 million PCs in the world. Nobody had done this. I was shocked, but I didn't know what to do with the data. It was like, all right, what do I do now? The Times isn't talking to me. CNN isn't talking to me. Who's, So it wound up being posted on a little blog site or website called ScoopNZ in New Zealand. And from there, Steve Freeman picked it up, and he had some credentials. He was a professor at UPenn. And he sort of we all kind of began to make noise about this and refine our analysis. And I'll tell you something, because they gave us so much material to work with in 2004, not only all 50 states and not only all these unadjusted exit polls, but then the exit pollsters themselves, Warren Matofsky, who was the father of exit polling, was tremendously embarrassed that his polls were so far off, especially in the battleground states.
Which they really weren't.
Well, they looked like they were, because they didn't match the vote counts. So at that time, and maybe I say all the way through to today, if the exit polls don't match the vote counts, the knee-jerk reaction is, well, something must be off with the exit polls. They must have oversampled Democrats. Well, they had too many college-educated respondents, whatever. But Edison and Matofsky issued a long, I think it was 80 some odd pages, detailed report about all the within precinct error figures and all the little ways in which they had stratified their polls and weighted their polls. I mean, it was really like as transparent as it's ever going to get. And they issued that to basically make the point, to fall on their sword and say,
no,
we got it wrong, and this is how we got it wrong.
Let me stop you there. Did they fall on the sword on their own, or do you think the system kind of said, fall on your sword, you keep doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's inherent in the system. I mean, you in a way, you're a client. The media was their sponsor. And so the media was their client. They were paying for it. They're very, obviously very corporate, very heavily invested in the legitimacy of the power structure, which means ultimately the legitimacy of the election. So there was a tremendous amount of pressure to sort of say, look, that pesky John Simon and Steve Freeman over there, they're making a lot of noise about how these things don't match up and everything. Well, we'll show you, this is why they don't match up, because we did this here and we did that there. And they came up with something that I unfortunately gave a name to, called the reluctant Bush responder theory. So the idea of the exit polls. Yeah, I've given a name to two things. One is the red shift, which really did work its way into the
that's what I was alluding to when I said that the polls had a natural skew. So I think we should expand on that.
We called it the red shift, and but the reluctant, they called it the reluctant Bush responder. But the problem was that the data that they presented, their own detailed data in the report, didn't support that hypothesis. And Steve and I and Ron Bayman and Kathy Dopp, I mean, a bunch of us sort of quants and would-be quants sat down and just kept looking at that data and working with that data. And by the time we were finished, we basically showed, and this was by mid-December, that their own data negated the reluctant Bush responder hypothesis. As a matter of fact, the response rate was higher in Bush strongholds. I mean, you know, again, this gets into pretty eye-glazing stuff, but we basically proved that their explanation for why their polls were quote unquote off was bogus. You know, baloney. Yeah, it was bogus. Unfortunately, if you wait till a month or 2 months after an election to prove anything, it's too late. There's a moment, there's a political moment right after an election before things are certified, and you have to act very quickly. And the way they worked it, they basically, and this is a whole side story, but they basically ran out the clock. So it didn't matter what we were able to prove. And we have never again, since 2004, been given that depth and that richness of data. They pulled more and more and more data away. So our job has gotten more and more difficult in terms of working with what's available. And let me put this in context. We have no access as public, even candidates, and very often election administrators themselves. There is no access to the memory cards on these computers. There's no access to the code that programs these computers. In 99.9% of cases, there's no access to the actual ballots that were cast. They are locked away and they're gone. You want to have a recount? Okay, come up with $7 million or come up with $3 million at a time when candidates' campaign budgets are empty. They've just run their campaign. The election just happened. They don't have any money left.
But the other thing is that when you talk about memory cards and so forth, even that, I'm a software developer. And even that doesn't really matter, because if your shenanigans occur in code, you know, there's nothing that the memory cards are going to tell you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are many layers of concealment, and I have learned, for the most part, to try to KISS, you know, keep it simple,
right?
Because otherwise, people just get, you know, you can see the eyes glazing. Yeah, it's overwhelming, and especially when you're saying something and presenting, you know, a reality that people don't want to see in the first place. It's very easy to become overwhelmed and just tune out. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, you can have self-deleting code, you can have assembly code, you can have all sorts of ways. I mean, I tell people, like, you know, sometimes people say, well, how would you go about rigging a machine? And I say, well, you know, let me count the ways. And I'm not a software developer, but you could just take the zero counters on the memory cards and offset them to plus X and minus X, let's say for Trump and Biden. You know, Trump gets plus 100, Biden gets minus 100. And at the end of the day, if 500 people come in and vote for Trump and 500 people come in and vote for Biden, it's going to show 600 for Trump, 400 for Biden, but 1,000 total votes, the same number of total votes. What does the election administrator do? Election administrator checks that against the poll tapes, says, well, 1,000 people came in, we got 1,000 votes, bang, certified. There's no deeper look than that. And so you've just shifted 20% of the vote on that particular machine, you know, a net of 20%, by adding, I mean, you know, you know more about this than I do, but from what I've understood, you can add 2 or 3 lines of code interpolated.
Oh, yeah.
And the zero counters are offset, and it's that easy.
Look,
because there's no observation.
Here's the issue, Jonathan. Unless you have a paper trail, something that is put away separately with who you voted for and the entire thing, computerized voting machine is held just like a religious person on faith, nothing more.
Yeah. Faith-based.
Nothing more. It's all faith. That you are expecting, or you're hoping that the people who designed the machine and your government who bought the machine didn't think that they would have shenanigans at hand. There's no and the thing about it is, I think what's important about books like yours is to let Americans understand that, let them understand why absolutely, you must have a paper trail where that paper is held for some determinate amount of time,
Yep.
so that if something major comes up, we can actually go ahead and spend the money to reproduce what really or actually occurred.
Yeah, and although I'd go even further than that, I'd say that, relying on a paper trail is problematic in its own right, because access to that paper trail, first of all, you have to know that something occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to discredit the exit polls as being, well, they're always off, then look at the 2016 election, for instance.
Right.
Now, when I talk about patterns, the 2016 election makes a very clear illustration of what I mean by a pattern. So the exit polls in 2016, they ran them for about 25 states, and there were other states that were non-competitive. They didn't run them. So this makes our job more difficult, but they still ran a national sample. It was a large sample, like over 20,000
Right.
respondents. And it was chosen in such a way as to represent the voting characteristics of the nation as a whole. That doesn't mean that they literally sampled
Right.
in every state. I was a pollster for a couple of years. I know how it's done. It's not particularly difficult to get that fully representative sample by choosing select precincts. And that's the science and the art of polling. So they had a national poll. And then they had polls in all the battleground states, right? So one of the things that you can see in Code Red is a chart that and when I do PowerPoints, I show the chart that shows what happened in that national poll and what happened in those battleground states.
Yeah.
Well, so it was more than 3 states. It was Wisconsin, Pennsylvania,
Iowa,
Michigan.
No, not Iowa. That wasn't,
Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida.
Right.
And Michigan and Florida are special cases because they are unfortunately 2 time zone states, which means that a little piece of the state winds up in the central time zone.
Michigan has 2 time zones also?
Yeah, the Northern Peninsula winds up.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of votes, it's about 1% of the state. And the same thing in Florida. In Florida, it might be like 3 or 4% of the state. It's a tiny little part of the state. But they will not release the exit polls until the polls have closed in both the Eastern time zone and then an hour later in the Central time zone.
Right.
So 98% of the people have voted. And today, since we have computer counting, 60% of that vote has been counted by the time they actually release the exit polls, which means that at the first public posting of the exit polls for Michigan and Florida, they've already been adjusted virtually to full congruence. So we don't see the red shift. We never get a public look at that. So in 2016, in Michigan, the red shift, the disparity between the exit polls and the vote counts was about 0.3%. It was negligible, but that's because
it was adjusted, right?
And in Florida, even though it had already been adjusted, it was still about 2% or so.
But wait, you're saying both of them were already adjusted when it was released?
That's right, when they were publicly released. So we couldn't really put a whole lot of weight on those. But in the states of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Ohio and North Carolina, the rest of this Clinton firewall remember going in, Nate Silver had 600 to 1 odds, and state by state, Clinton has an 85% chance here and a 78% chance there. And so you multiply those all together, the odds of Trump winning that entire slew of states was very, very low. Of course, it was shocking. But when we looked at the exit poll disparities, the red shift in those key states, I think Wisconsin was something like 5.8%, Pennsylvania was 5.4%, Florida was 2.3%, North Carolina was 5%, Ohio was 8%. And in all the cases except Ohio, they entailed a reversal of the outcome. In Ohio, it was a dead heat in the exit polls, and Trump won by 8%. So you can't say that was an absolute reversal, but in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina,
which would have given her the election,
going away.
But let me back up, because this is important. Jonathan, this is important. I think what you're saying is that uh, this. Let's go back to the Hillary Clinton election. You're saying that this red shift, you have the data before it was cooked for those battleground states.
Yes, it was publicly posted. You know, again, we're not 100% sure. There was no cooking
But it was
before it
close
was
to.
public posted, but it was,
Close to.
yeah, it was relatively pure.
Right. What I want to do is correlate something between you and Palast. Okay, Palast is another person that is looking into voter suppression and all that kind
Yeah,
of a stuff.
yeah.
Now, does your do those polls take into account voter suppression? Let me tell you what I mean by that.
I know exactly what you mean, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, a
Yeah.
lot of people are going to go in there and vote, and they're going to vote provisionally, and they're going to come out and tell the pollster I voted.
Yeah.
But their vote is never going to count.
Yeah, and this is a sticky wicket. In fact, in 2016, the provisional votes in those states were relatively small. In other words, it was much smaller than the disparity. The percentage of provisional
That was
votes
my yeah. Okay.
would not account for the disparity.
Okay, because that there
But-
I want to eliminate that from
Right.
being the issue.
It's a very legitimate question, though, because it's very hard to get an answer out of the pollsters. The best answer I ever got was that they will take into account provisionals. In other words, one of their screening questions on the poll will be, did you vote provisionally?
Got it.
But
Yeah.
that still leaves the problem that some provisional ballots are counted and some are not counted.
Right.
So they have to sort of, estimate and
Yes,
fudge
right.
what got counted. That having been said, and here is the key. So when we had all these big red shifts that would have reversed the outcome, we were, for the most part, dismissed because, well, the exit polls got it wrong. They had too many college educated in the sample. They oversampled Democrats who can't rely on the exit polls. They're worse than useless, blah, blah, blah. So what we did is what we call a second order comparative. And that is the key foundational brick underneath this forensic evidence. We looked at the national exit poll, and the national exit poll basically got it right. The red shift, such as it was in the national exit poll, was 1%, which was right around where the margin of error, what we call total survey error,
Right.
expected for that poll would be. So miraculously, when you were polling the nation as a whole, it was accurate. The polls worked. They didn't oversample Democrats. They didn't have too many educated, even though it had 50% college educated in the national poll, which I think by consensus was too much. It still came out right.
Devil's advocate on math here.
Yeah.
Now we have a select set of states that where the shenanigans are supposedly gonna happen, right?
Targeted, yes.
Targeted. My
States
question
that
also is, could it be that it's not shenanigans that targeted the states, but operatives who understand that these are the states that matter and work in that particular regards?
Well, if you mean work to win votes, it wouldn't show up as a red shift. I mean, it would show up as a victory in those states because, let's say, Hillary Clinton did not.
Okay, so what you're saying is that it did show up as a red shift and
Absolutely.
not showed up as as just the amount of voters that are going out or a disproportionate amount. They've changed the makeup of the electorate.
Yeah, look, good campaigning is going to work. Hillary Clinton
Right.
did not campaign in Wisconsin. That was colossally stupid.
Right.
We agree. But the red shift cannot be explained that way because, again, these people were taking these exit polls. They were answering the exit polls. They're anonymous.
Right.
There's no pressure to lie or anything like that. They're written and they're anonymous. You're not responding verbally to an interviewer. And what we saw was, and again, if you just had a bunch of exit polls that were off, you could very reasonably say, well, there's something wrong in the design or the execution. There might be response bias. There might be selection bias, but what we had was a baseline. Same company, running the same polls, using the same methodology, nationwide, accurate, states that mattered off, all in the same direction
Okay, so let me
by
ask you now,
enough to reverse the outcome.
Jonathan,
That's the second order comparative, and that's very powerful.
we're running out of time right here, so I want to ask you the very specific question. What is there to do now? We know what the problem is. You've identified the problem. You've got the research with the appropriate entities that corroborate each other. What are we to do?
Okay, part of the problem, and I wish we had run out of time before this question.
Go ahead. I mean, go ahead.
I'm making light of it, but it's a very serious problem because at this point, I mean, we've waited very long in what has been a long process, decades process, and we're looking at it sort of come to a head. And we're looking at it in a situation where we have to worry about two very separate things. One is that Trump, Rove, GOP will rig elections to win, either win for Trump or at least hold the Senate for the GOP if they decide, you know, they've had enough of Trump. That there could be really systemic rigging going on, and targeted, but enough to really make a difference. And it would be undetectable. So that's one problem. Then we have a second problem, is that we could have a relatively legitimate result in which Trump loses, and he's already signaled he will not accept that loss, and he's already put stormtroopers out in the streets. And there's a lot of intimidation around voting by mail. They're trying to sabotage voting by mail. They're taking over the postal service, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a multi-front battle at this point. And all I can say is, I mean, all the forensic, I'll be trying to gather whatever data I can on election night. And before that, we'll have it spreadsheeted. We'll produce whatever analysis we can produce to shed some light on what's actually gone on. But we're concerned. We're concerned that there may not be exit polls because there won't be all that much at poll voting. So we may have polls that, you know, are called election day polls or something like that, but that are harder to work with. So we're going to have even less data. And we have a voting period that's spread out over a much longer period of time because of all the in-person voting, all the mail voting and stuff. This just makes it really difficult. So what I'm recommending is we got to be alert, we got to be aware, we got to be prepared. We got to be prepared to react to an illegitimate election, and we've got to be prepared to defend a legitimate election against a refusal to accept those results. Now, we don't know if Trump and all the corporations are going to be aligned. We don't know what's going to come. As a matter of fact, I have to say at this point that for all the experts out there and all the books they've written, there's a book called Will He Go by Lawrence Douglas, a professor at Amherst. There's a book called Rigged by David Scheimer about what the Russians are up to. There's a lot of books out there and there are a lot of experts, and I don't think anybody can say, okay, this is what we're going to see and this is what you need to do. So in a very general sense, as an individual voter, you got to really stay on top of it. You can take nothing for granted. You cannot assume that you haven't been purged. You cannot assume that you can vote at the last minute. You cannot assume that if you bring something to the post office 2 weeks before the election, that it's going to get there and be counted. It's got to be 6 weeks before the election. You got to stand there and watch them postmark it. All sorts of things that really should never have to come into play. But the reality is they do have to come into play. And then I'll put in I'll put in two plugs. One is read my book, because it gives a lot of information in terms of what to expect, what kind of games get played, and what we need to do to rise up against it. And the other is there's a lot of organized efforts right now to try to prevent voter suppression and secure vote by mail. Legislatively, we're dead on arrival. We're not going to get legislation out of the federal government. Most states, if they haven't already passed it, we're not going to see it. But there's an organization called scrutineers.org where the founder, Emily Levy, it's a relatively new organization, but as somebody who was executive director of a similar organization for 10 years, I can say it's hard to herd cats and it's really hard to do this work. And she is doing an amazing job
Yes,
of
she
bringing
is.
people together and getting people motivated and getting people to reach out to other people. Nobody has ever accused me of being an organizer. So I just basically sit there in awe of what she and her comrades. I mean, I'm part of the group, but many people have been more active than I am. I'm mostly a writer and an analyst and whatnot, but there are people who are going out there, and they are at the very local level, the county level, and certainly at the state level, putting pressure on administrators to say, look, we are looking at a very extraordinary election here. This is not ordinary. You can't just follow standard operating procedure. It's going to require more vigilance. It's going to require more protection. And they're giving out information about what you can do as an individual and when you have to do it, a kind of timeline of what your responsibilities are. And frankly, I think that in the situation we're in, I mean, the one thing you got to say for Donald Trump and the takeover of, the fascists is that people are waking up, and elections obviously matter. And there's tremendous passion around where we're going to be in 6 months from now. So that has to translate itself into, getting down and dirty and securing your own vote and doing everything you can to secure the votes of as many other people as you can.
Jonathan, let me tell you, I concur with everything that you said. And not only that, I think everybody now has to take that personal responsibility to make sure that their votes count. The one thing I want to add to that, and I wanted to discuss this a bit more with you, but we're kind of running out of time now. But I don't want us to have any fear. I don't want to hear the question about will he go. I don't want to hear that question. I want to say when this election is over, he is going. Because one of the things that would make someone want to stay, if they believe people would accept that as a plausibility.
Yeah.
So there's no ifs, there are no buts. Whoever we legitimately elect in 2020 November, that is the president, and the current person in the White House, if it's not the person who won, is getting the hell out of there. And if a posse or an armada has to do it, we will. Jonathan D. Simon, author of Code Red, Computerized Elections and the War on American Democracy, the 2020 edition. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you so much for having me, Alberto. And let's do it. Let's do it all.
Yeah, thank you for telling me about no audio. I think we have audio now. Okay, we've got audio now. So what I want to do beforehand is to tell you, we have to get rid of what? We have to get rid of that guy. Don't forget it. We got to make sure and get rid of that guy. Anyhow, moving on. Listen, folks, if you're on YouTube, please remember you can always super chat us to make sure that we can continue doing what we're doing here, which is giving you solid information. I think, Norman, they told me that that you can hear me now. So if for some reason people still can't hear me, let me know. But I think I am still audio full now, no longer audio free, audio full. Before we get into the next subject, I want to invite you, those of you that are listening right now, to become members of Politics Done Right. Please become members of Politics Done Right. And how do you do that? You become a member by either subscribing via Patreon, which is politicsdoneright.com/Patreon. You can become a member as well by going through PayPal. That is politicsdoneright.com/PayPal. You can join our Facebook subscription. Facebook just started allowing us to do this. So you can join our group, or not our group, but our subscriptions on Facebook, politicsdoneright.com/Facebook. And of course, you can visit our store. And where do you get to our store? politicsdoneright.com/store. And I kind of put that in wrong there. Let me do it again. politicsdoneright.com/store. What do you get at our store? You have our Politics Done Right cup, and you also have our books. Some of them are, particularly As I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. You learn everything as well. Se puede ayudarse or something like that. I like that, Mr. Bruce. Se puede ayudar. Bruce want me to speak in Spanish. Puede ayudar a Politics Done Right por comprar mis libros. Lose Weight and Be Fit Now. And As I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. This is serious, though, folks. This is very serious. And we do this because we know we have to do this. And this doesn't end in November. It begins in November. We are in the pre-show right now to get somebody plausible elected. But after November is when the work really begins. A lot of people just don't get it yet, right? But things are going to be rough. Beginning now till November, it's going to be tough. We're going to have a lot of our brothers and sisters suffering. If you are able to aid them, whatever we can to make it better for other people, because it's going to be rough. And the worst part about it, folks, it is not going to be televised, because America and the powers that be are not going to want Americans to see Americans in the state that they've noticed in other countries, which it will be here. But we can't let that out, because we can't depress the exceptionalism of who we are. So please remember that we have a lot of work to do, and we are going to be doing that work. I guarantee you we'll be here doing that work, but we do need your support. So please go ahead and find some form in which you can support us by contributing, by subscribing, by sharing our stuff, all that good stuff. Anyhow, I want to show you a video. And this video, I was so happy. I don't know if you guys know who Nicole Wallace is. Nicole Wallace was one of President Bush's most active speakers, supporters, I guess spokesperson, etc. Yesterday, she interviewed a Republican mayor. And I can't tell you how impressed I was. I want you to play it now, and then we'll take it on the other side. Nicole Wallace today did something of beauty in the way she interviewed, not necessarily a Trump sycophant, but one that surely shows a strong timidity towards Trump. Check this out, and let's take it on the other side.
Do you feel like the tone set at the federal level had this backward, that we'll go back to work first and we'll be pandemic later?
I think that the CDC, which is supposed to be the governmental entity that guides us throughout this, has not been either, I don't know what the reason is, but they have not been giving us as much guidance as we would like to see.
Do you really not know what the reason is, why you haven't seen the CDC guidance front and center?
You can tell me what the reasons are, but I think from my perspective...
I just read the papers. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, listen, to me, it doesn't matter what the reasons are. I mean, I think we need that guidance. We need the CDC to do what it's supposed to do, right? We need it to tell governments like us, with the experts that it has, exactly what actions need to be taken when, because cities like ours don't have a health department. You know, we rely on health departments like the state health department and the federal CDC to make decisions. Otherwise, we have to cobble together our own set of experts to make decisions like the ones that we've been making up to this point, which have been very difficult to make in the absence of greater guidance.
Who is your main contact at the federal government?
To be honest with you, we have a legislative liaison that we talk to, but we don't get a lot of communication, and we have not gotten a lot of communication throughout this entire pandemic.
And you think your theory is that the fault lies with the CDC?
Well, listen, I don't know whether the fault lies with the CDC or whether it's something political, whether it's something greater than that. I just think that the CDC is the governmental agency tasked with controlling diseases. And so whether it's a political...
You're a mayor of a huge city in a hotspot, and it's stunning to me that you haven't read the public reporting that the vice president is using public appearances to squash CDC guidelines or diminish them when it comes to the debate around public school openings. You surely have read public reports that the CDC has been cut out of patient reportings from hospitals that have hospitalized COVID patients. You surely, I've spent time in Miami. I know you get the New York Times there. They've had stunning reporting that HHS and the CDC tried to sound the alarms to the White House. I'm happy to try to get you some better phone numbers, but sir, you must be aware that the CDC is trying to help people exactly like yourself.
Ouch! But she's absolutely right. This guy is the mayor of a major United States city. The CDC is not getting the information from him because his master, Trump, is not allowing them to do so. And in the process, as opposed to making a call to the American people to sort of edge this guy to do his job, to save lives in his city, he doesn't have the nerve to come out there and say, we need the president to stop doing what he is doing so that my city, and as much as he's a Republican like I am, we need the president to do his job so that people in my city will stop dying. And he can't even do that. Look, Steve Schmidt and all these guys from the Lincoln Project, they're correct in saying it's not enough to get rid of Donald Trump. You have to get rid of the whole slew of the sycophants. In other words, not only the senators, but the governors, the mayors, they are all responsible for the pain that Americans are going through right now because they have allowed themselves to be led by a psychopath that is doing nothing but getting Americans killed, destroying their well-being, and destroying the possibility of them ever being really financially independent and healthy. That is so true. Now, hey, I got a super chat. Thank you so kindly, Dimitri OG, for that super chat. And thank you so kindly, James, for that PayPal. You guys are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It is you who ensure that we can continue doing this, and we will continue doing this. And rest assured, last night I wrote 15 pages of how to talk to the right winger, right? And I was recalling some of the issues that, because I'm trying to release that book next week. It's going to be probably, 50 to 100 pages. I don't know quite yet, depending on how many stories I tell. But it is interesting because I was pointing out that we on the left, right, we really have a lot of work to do, but we have to do it differently. And the reason we have to do it differently is that what we are doing is not necessarily in sync with what the corporate state wants. And even as Democrats, those who are Democrats, the Democrats share a lot in common with the corporatocracy in that, I'm talking about mainline Democrats now, centrist Democrats, that sort of thing. They're not bad folk or anything like that. Just like centrist Republicans, these guys aren't bad people. But if you are funded by corporations, there's just some limits that you have to go through. But grassroots, if we as grassroots, which most of us are, if we just do everybody a little bit, and that's what I learned with it. If we just do a little bit, we share here. When we have folks that we see in trouble that otherwise would have to compromise, but knowing that there is support there, they don't have to do that. I mean, the grassroots is really where the power is. The corporations saw it. The corporations saw that, oh my God, now the people are not buying our gas anymore. We are in trouble. They are the ones who really ran things. If we ever come to the realization, our inherent power, the intrinsic power that we have, and that is the kind of stuff, I was talking to another guy earlier today, and I was saying, you know what? The biggest fear, the reason why everybody wants us to be fearing, right? And notice what I told Jonathan Simon earlier. I don't want us to fear whether Donald Trump is going to leave the office or not. If the most of the American people say, Donald Trump, you're not going to be there, We are not supposed to fear whether he's going to leave or not. That should not be in our vocabulary. If he loses the election and he refused to go, the grassroots get to hell up to Washington, D.C., the millions of people, and say, get out of our house. And people say, oh, the militia is going to be there. The militia? Do you think the militia is going to go ahead against the millions of people? Oh, no. Oh, no. Let me tell you, America, we have to always display strength from the grassroots. I don't want to hear anybody talking about, I'm scared that he's not going to leave. I don't want to hear anybody talking about somehow he has more power than he does. He does not. The power lies with you. And as long as we remember that, we will be just fine. Michael says, I say Trump won't be leaving until January 2025. Wishful thinking, Trump is a goner. Trump is a goner. Continuously, again, thank you, Dimitri OG, for your super chat. Appreciate that very much. Michael Rudden, is this guy demonstrating willful ignorance on national TV? CDC has been clear. Yes, he is. That's the whole deal. And notice he said, after all, I don't care who's the fault. Notice how he came back to her. Para ver. Anything else I need to talk real quick? Michael Brooks. Rest in peace, Michael Brooks, one of the leading voices in the progressive movement. He was also on the Majority Report with Sam Cedar. Apparently, he died from a blog. He was only 37 years old. I wonder if he had COVID. I don't know, but I have relatives who had COVID and got that blood clot thing as well. So, let me tell you, folks, let's just stick together. We're at the end of the show. I want to thank you guys all for being here. Please remember, even after the show, please share the programs. Also, anybody who wants to be a guest on Politics Done Right, if you have something that you want to talk to for 5 minutes that you want to tell people about, let me know. Because I tell you something. I was talking to Jonathan earlier on before I started the taping, and I said I really want people to feel themselves in a participatory, I can't say that word right. I got to figure it out. Democracy, where everybody's voices count. I want people to stop thinking that only certain people have voices. I want people to start thinking that my voice count as well. Of course, I'm going to tell you, please make your voice be researched now. But, if you have something to say or you have something to ask, we got to get to the point where we're all doing that. Okay, I'm at 58. I got to get out of here. Hey, guys, thank you so kindly for being a part of Politics Done Right. Please remember to go ahead and on those links that I put up there, support the program. We need a lot more support. We need to get to 1,000 subscribers. I think we're at probably 126, 127 or something like that. So we're just about 10%. Patreon.com. Go to politicsdoneright.com/Patreon. And you can shop at our store also. Get our t-shirts, get our cups, get our books, get all of that. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. And you know how I end this baby. I am what again? Out. Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.